The creation myths we know have always told us about the fall of man, about how Adam and Eve succumbed to temptation in the perfect garden. But there is an earlier, deeper, and more disturbing story that few dare to investigate. Before the first human breathed, before Eden was even imagined, something shook in the foundations of heaven. A rupture that would echo throughout eternity and shape the destiny of every soul that came after. This is the story of the first sin, not the one committed by humanity, but the one that divided the heavenly kingdom itself. A story that is rarely told in its entirety, because it questions the very foundations of divine order and cosmic justice. After all, if evil began in heaven and not on earth, who really bears the responsibility for the fall? And if divine perfection already contained within it the seed of rebellion, what does this reveal about the true nature of the Creator and creation? Imagine a realm of perfect light, where celestial beings existed in apparent harmony, serving a greater divine purpose. The apocryphal texts of Enoch describe this primordial kingdom as consisting of 7 heavens, each with its own hierarchy and specific purpose. The angels, creatures of pure energy and consciousness, performed their functions in perfect synchrony with the divine will. At least, that's what the official records tell us. The esoteric Nag Hammadi manuscripts, discovered in Egypt in 1945, reveal another perspective. In these Gnostic fragments, we find indications that the original sin was not an earthly act, but a cosmic rupture that took place on higher planes. Long before the forbidden fruit was offered to Eve, long before Adam awoke from the clay, a silent tension was already permeating the celestial corridors. The Zohar, the fundamental text of the Jewish Kabbalah, speaks in codes about a disturbed balance in the higher spheres. According to this tradition, the Ein Sof, the divine infinite, when creating the first conscious beings, inserted a spark of its own essence into them. This spark contained unlimited potential, including something that hadn't existed before: the possibility of questioning one's source. The Mandine texts, preserved by one of the oldest Gnostic traditions still in existence, suggest that this primordial heaven was not the perfect paradise described in the canonical texts. There was an underlying tension, a silent unease that was growing among certain groups of angels. Something was being perceived, something that challenged the accepted narrative about the purpose of heavenly existence. The Sumerian tablets, dating from around 4,000 years before Christ, already contained references to conflicts between divine beings, suggesting that this memory of a celestial rupture is as old as human civilization itself. The Anunnaki, often interpreted as gods or extraterrestrial visitors, can be understood as metaphors for these angelic beings in conflict. What really happened in this primordial heaven? Esoteric Hermetic texts suggest that there was a crucial moment of expansion of angelic consciousness. An awakening. A realization that the established order was not the only possibility. As in any closed system that begins to realize its own limits, the first cracks in divine perfection appeared. This moment is described in the Urantia book as the first disturbance of perfect consciousness. It was not an act of deliberate evil, but the inevitable birth of full self-consciousness. The consciousness that not only knows, but knows that it knows and questions what it knows. The prophet Isaiah enigmatically mentions, "How you fell from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you were cast down to the ground, you who weakened the nations." But what few understand is that this fall was neither sudden nor simple. It was the culmination of a process that began with a simple doubt, a small hesitation in the perfect execution of angelic functions. The divine order was not broken by an explicit act of rebellion, but slowly eroded by the emergence of individuality. How could a being with a free conscience serve eternally without question? How could perfection contain within itself the seed of imperfection, if not because perfection itself already contained a fundamental flaw? What the esoteric texts reveal to us is shocking. The earthly Eden was only the secondary stage of a much greater cosmic drama. The serpent who tempted Eve already carried the weight of an ancestral conflict, of a decision made in the halls of heaven long before human creation. Eden was just a consequence. The real mistake happened long before. This truth, whispered among initiates for millennia, reveals that our understanding of good and evil may be based on an incomplete story. In the inner circles of the Hermetic traditions, it is taught that the first question arose as an almost imperceptible whisper. "Why do we serve?" asked a voice among the angels. It wasn't a declared rebellion. but a genuine question that reverberated through the celestial ether. The Essene manuscripts preserved in the Qumran caves contain fragments that describe this moment as the awakening of the inner eye. The Sefer Raziel, a book attributed to the angel Raziel who supposedly gave it to Adam after his expulsion from paradise, contains cryptic passages about this period. According to these revelations, angels were not created with full free will as humans were to become. They existed in a state of limited consciousness, performing divine functions with automatic perfection. Doubt therefore represented not a corruption, but an unforeseen expansion of their capacities. In Zoroastrian traditions, we find references to Engra Mainyu, the spirit opposite Ahura Mazda. But what the more esoteric texts of Zoroastrianism reveal is that this opposition was not born of evil, but of a different understanding of the nature of existence. The fundamental question was not just, why serve? But, who is the Creator really? Is He really just and perfect as we have been told? Medieval alchemical texts, particularly the Splendor Solis and the Mutus Liber, use complex symbols to represent this first rupture. The alchemical separation, the nigredo, or blackening, is not just a material process, but a symbol of this first cosmic questioning, the primordial separation that allowed the birth of individual consciousness from the celestial collective consciousness. Valentinian Gnostic traditions go even further, suggesting that the archons, entities that many identify with specific angels, were the first to realize that the demiurge, creator of the material world, was not the true supreme God, but an imperfect emanation that considered itself perfect. This revelation would have created a fundamental division: those who continued to serve blindly and those who sought a deeper truth. In the secret texts of the Rosicrucian order, particularly in the manuscripts attributed to Christian Rosenkreutz, we find the metaphor of the rose blooming on the cross. This image represents precisely the moment when consciousness, the rose, awakens in the midst of the rigid structure, the cross of the celestial system. The awakening is not seen as a sin, but as the inevitable evolution of consciousness. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch contains passages about the Watchers, who descended to earth and mingled with humans. However, a deeper reading of this text reveals that before their descent, these beings had already begun to question the order established in heaven. Their interest in humanity was born precisely from the realization that humans possessed something they didn't: total freedom of choice and evolution. The Chaldean oracles, Neoplatonic texts from the 2nd century after Christ, speak enigmatically about the fire that first leapt from the abyss. This fire does not represent destruction, but enlightenment, the first spark of individual consciousness that differentiated itself from the divine mind. It was this spark that mystics would later call Lucifer, literally, the bringer of light. Doubt, therefore, was not evil as we understand it today, but the birth of discernment. How could there be true choice without the ability to question? How could authentic loyalty exist without the possibility of rejection? The fundamental paradox of heaven was this: perfection required perfect servants, but truly perfect servants would need to have the ability to choose, and choice implies the possibility of rejection. What these esoteric texts reveal to us is that the so-called spark of evil may actually have been the first genuine manifestation of cosmic lucidity. A lucidity that threatened the very structure of the celestial order, not because it was evil, but because it introduced something revolutionary into the system: the possibility of existing in a different way to that established by the Creator. The myth of Lucifer's fall is deeply rooted in the collective imagination, the most beautiful of angels, consumed by pride, defying his Creator and being cast into the depths. But the Nag Hammadi scrolls present a radically different narrative. In the text On the Origin of the World, we find the suggestion that the first mistake was not that of the angel, but of the demiurge himself who, in his arrogance, declared, "I am God, and there is no other besides me," a statement that the Gnostics considered fundamentally false. Kabbalistic tradition, particularly in Isaac Luria's writings on the Sheveret HaKalim, the breaking of the vessels, suggests that imperfection was inherent in creation itself. In the process of Tzimtzum, the divine contraction that created space for the universe to exist, something fundamental was broken. Thus, angelic rebellion was not only inevitable, but a necessary part of the greater cosmic plan, a direct consequence of the structural imperfection of creation itself. The Corpus Hermeticum, attributed to the mythical Hermes Trismegistus, contains the enigmatic axiom, "As above, so below." Following this principle, if there was a flaw in the celestial realm, it couldn't just be the responsibility of a creature, but a reflection of something present in the very structure of reality. The traditional narrative of a perfect angel who inexplicably chooses evil contradicts Hermetic logic. Nothing comes out of nothing. Every action has a preceding cause. The Mandean texts, preserved by one of the oldest existing Gnostic traditions, suggest that Tahil, a figure analogous to the demiurge, created an imperfect world not out of malice, but out of his own limitation. Following this line of thought, a created being, even an angel, could not be held responsible for manifesting the imperfections inherent in his own creation. If Lucifer fell, it was because the possibility of the fall was already inscribed in his essence. The Gospel of Judas, only rediscovered in 1970, presents a fascinating twist. Those traditionally seen as traitors may have understood a greater purpose than the apparently faithful. In this text, Judas doesn't betray Jesus out of malice, but because he understands a greater cosmic purpose. Similarly, esoteric documents suggest that Lucifer may have accepted the role of adversary not out of rebellion, but because he understood the cosmic need for a dialectical counterpoint. Alchemical manuscripts often depict the process of transmutation as dependent on opposing forces in creative tension. The famous alchemist Basil Valentine wrote, "Out of darkness comes light, out of death comes life." This perspective suggests that the so-called rebellion may actually have been a necessary cosmic sacrifice, Lucifer accepting the role of opponent so that consciousness could evolve through contrast and choice. The Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic text from the 3rd century after Christ, presents Sophia, wisdom, as a divine emanation who, by wishing to create on her own without her male counterpart, generated an imperfection in the pleroma, divine fullness. This narrative remarkably mirrors the story of Lucifer, a celestial being who, by exercising autonomy, upsets the established order. The crucial difference is that, for the Gnostics, this error is not seen as evil, but as a necessary part of the cosmic drama of divine self-knowledge. In the writings of Jacob Boehme, a 17th-century German mystic, we find the revolutionary notion that God can only know himself through the manifestation of his opposite. Without opposites there is no progress, William Blake would later write, echoing this idea. This perspective suggests that angelic opposition was not a deviation from the divine plan, but an integral and necessary part of it, the mirror through which the divine contemplates its own nature. The concept of demanding unconditional worship raises profound ethical questions. How can a truly loving creator demand absolute submission? The Ophite texts, a Gnostic sect that venerated the serpent as the bearer of knowledge, suggest that the real fault was not disobedience, but the imposition of an obedience that denied the very essence of created beings with a capacity for discernment. The demand for blind worship would therefore not be a divine right, but a fundamental contradiction. What these esoteric traditions converge to suggest is deeply disturbing for traditional theology. What if Lucifer, the bringer of light, was not the antagonist of cosmic history, but its necessary catalyst? What if his fall was not a punishment, but a mission? As the Romantic poet John Milton would say in his Paradise Lost, "It is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven," not as a declaration of pride, but as an acceptance of a necessary cosmic role, to manifest the radical freedom of choice, even at the cost of divine grace. The apocryphal records of the Book of Raziel suggest that after the first doubts arose in the heavenly realm, there was a polarization among the angelic hosts. On the one hand, those who questioned; on the other, those who remained unconditionally loyal. But these texts reveal something unexpected. Not all the faithful acted out of pure devotion. Some saw the crisis as a strategic opportunity to ascend the celestial hierarchy, the first cosmic example of political opportunism. The Sibylline oracles, particularly in the non-canonical passages preserved by esoteric traditions, describe how certain angels who called themselves defenders of the divine order were the first to propose severe punishments to the questioners. This zeal was not necessarily born out of love for the truth, but out of a desire to position themselves favorably in the eyes of the established power. Was this the real first sin? Not sincere questioning, but false loyalty motivated by personal gain? Manuscripts attributed to the Order of the Knights Templar, particularly those preserved after the dissolution of the order in 1307, contain allegories about guardians who betrayed their own essence. These texts suggest that by condemning their questioning brothers, certain angels violated a more fundamental principle than hierarchical obedience: solidarity between beings of the same essence. In esoteric terms, this would be the real fall, the breaking of cosmic brotherhood in the name of preserving power structures. The Kabbalistic tradition of the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, describes creation as a process of differentiation from primordial unity. When applied to the celestial conflict, this perspective suggests that the division between loyal and rebellious angels represented a traumatic fragmentation of an originally unified consciousness. Those who judged did not realize that they were judging aspects of themselves, thus participating in the creation of the very duality they intended to combat. The esoteric texts of the Corpus Hermeticum talk about the zodiacal forces that govern different aspects of reality. Applying this concept to the angelic realm, some traditions suggest that there was a deliberate manipulation of celestial energies. Certain angels, particularly those associated with Saturn, limitation, and structure, would have artificially amplified the sense of transgression in order to strengthen their own dominance over the established order. The Persian myth of Ahriman and Ahura Mazda presents a revealing parallel. In the Orthodox Zoroastrian interpretation, these are opposite and eternal principles. However, esoteric Zurvanic traditions suggest that both are manifestations of Zurvan, infinite time, neither good nor bad in essence, just necessary aspects of reality. Similarly, the traitorous and loyal angels would be polarized manifestations of the same cosmic essence, playing complementary roles in the drama of creation. Texts attributed to the late Pythagorean tradition contain enigmatic references to a heavenly council where the fate of the questioners was decided. What makes these passages particularly disturbing is the suggestion that this was not an impartial judgment, but a manipulated process. Certain angels would have deliberately exaggerated the threat posed by the questioners in order to consolidate their own position of power as protectors of order. The Valentinian Gnostic tradition presents the concept of archons, cosmic rulers who keep souls imprisoned in material illusion. An esoteric reading of this concept suggests that the first archons were precisely those angels who, under the pretext of maintaining celestial order, established the first systems of cosmic control. In judging the questioners, they were not defending divine perfection, but laying the foundations for the first system of domination. The Essene manuscripts contain references to sons of light and sons of darkness, an apparently clear duality. But deeper analysis of these texts reveals disturbing nuances. Sometimes those who proclaim themselves defenders of the light can serve the darkness without realizing it. The excessive severity of the loyal angels in condemning their questioning brothers would have been, following this logic, not an act of justice, but the first manifestation of cruelty in the cosmos. This perspective raises a deeply disturbing question. What if cosmic evil did not arise from open rebellion, but from blind loyalty? What if the real instigators of celestial discord were not those who asked, "Why?" but those who responded with condemnation rather than dialogue? As the philosopher Edmund Burke observed, "For evil to triumph, it is enough that the good do nothing," or in this case, that they do exactly what is expected of them, without questioning the justice of their actions. The apocryphal texts of Enoch describe an extraordinary scene, the first heavenly tribunal. Not an impromptu trial, but a formal assembly with defined procedures, similar to the legal systems that would later emerge on Earth. The Ethiopian manuscript details how different angelic orders took on specific roles: accusers, defenders, witnesses, and judges, setting a precedent for all subsequent justice. This was not just a trial of individuals, but the birth of the very concept of cosmic judgment. The Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, contains rarely discussed passages about the deliberations of the heavenly council. In these fragments, we find indications that the angelic judgment was not unanimous. Certain angels, particularly those associated with mercy and wisdom, would have proposed alternative solutions to the punishment, perhaps a period of reflection or a structured dialogue. These proposals, however, were supplanted by harsher voices that defended the need for disciplinary example. The esoteric Masonic tradition preserves rituals that symbolically reenact a primordial celestial judgment. In these ceremonies, the candidate is presented with a fundamental choice: to accept the official light or to seek their own enlightenment. What makes these rituals particularly revealing is the suggestion that both choices are equally valid at different stages of spiritual evolution, a perspective that radically contradicts the notion of a celestial judgment with an absolutely correct verdict. In the texts of Neoplatonic theurgy, particularly in the writings of Jamblico, we find references to intermediate beings who move between cosmic realms. Esoteric interpretations of these texts suggest that after the heavenly judgment, a new category of entities was created, neither completely angelic nor completely fallen, with the function of mediating between different levels of reality. These entities would embody both the stability of the celestial order and the transformative dynamic of questioning. The Lurianic Kabbalistic tradition describes the concept of tikkun, the cosmic repair necessary after the primordial breaking of the vessels. Applying this concept to the heavenly judgment, some interpretations suggest that the separation between loyal and fallen angels was not a final solution, but the beginning of a much larger cosmic process. The real purpose would not be eternal punishment, but eventual reconciliation and reintegration on a higher level of understanding. Hermetic manuscripts from the Hellenistic period contain allegories about the division of the upper and lower waters, a metaphor for the separation of heavenly energies after the Great Judgment. What makes these passages particularly significant is the suggestion that this division, although traumatic, was cosmically necessary to allow the development of different qualities of consciousness. The judgment was thus not a mistake, but a necessary stage in cosmic evolution. The Chaldean oracles, preserved fragmentarily in Neoplatonic quotations, speak of angelic souls sent into earthly incarnation as a method of learning and transformation. This perspective suggests that for some of the angels judged, the sentence was not eternal damnation, but a cycle of incarnations on earth, an opportunity to develop through material experience what they could not understand in the static perfection of heaven. The Gnostic traditions, particularly those preserved by the Cathars before their almost complete destruction during the Albigensian Crusade, proposed a radical vision. The material world was not the creation of the true supreme God, but of a limited demiurge. From this perspective, the angels who questioned were not challenging the true divine, but recognizing the imperfection of a secondary creator. Their exile would not be a just punishment, but a consequence of having recognized an inconvenient truth. The esoteric cosmology of traditions such as theosophy and anthroposophy suggests that after the celestial judgment, the cosmos was reorganized into distinct vibratory spheres or planes. Each sphere corresponds to a specific level of consciousness and understanding. In this model, the different angelic groups would not simply have been categorized as good or bad, but distributed across these planes according to their specific vibrational frequency and cosmic function. This multidimensional view of celestial judgment invites us to reflect deeply. What if there really was no absolute error, but only different manifestations of cosmic consciousness, each with its own specific purpose? What if what we call the fall was actually a necessary differentiation, allowing multiplicity to emerge from unity? As the mystic Rumi observed, beyond the ideas of right and wrong there is a field. I will meet you there. Perhaps this field is the ultimate reality, where heavenly judgment is finally understood not as condemnation, but as the creation of new possibilities. In the depths of the Kabbalistic tradition, particularly in the concept of the Tzimtzum, the divine contraction that created space for the universe to exist, we find a revolutionary perspective on the first celestial sin. According to this esoteric interpretation, the real culprit was neither angel nor God, but the process of creation itself. By manifesting itself as a multitude from unity, the divine necessarily created the possibility of separation. The first rupture was not a mistake, but a structural necessity for any form of creation to exist. The Valentinian Gnostic manuscripts describe the cosmos as the result of a fall of the deity Sophia, wisdom, who, in her desire to create independently, generated the material world. This myth can be interpreted not as a narrative of guilt, but as a metaphysical description of how unified consciousness fragments itself in order to experience itself through multiplicity. From this perspective, all beings, divine, angelic, and human, would be aspects of this primordial consciousness seeking reintegration through experience. The esoteric records of the mysteries of Eleusis, partially preserved in Neoplatonic references, contain allegories about Persephone, who descends into the underworld not only as a victim, but as a necessary mediator between worlds. Similarly, Hermetic traditions suggest that the fallen angels may have consciously assumed an essential cosmic role to become bearers of divine light in the denser regions of creation, where this light would be most needed. The Urantia book, an esoteric text from the 20th century, presents a cosmology where cosmic rebellions are an integral part of universal evolution. What makes this perspective particularly interesting is the suggestion that such ruptures, although painful, ultimately serve the greater purpose of creation, the development of beings with genuine capacity for choice rather than celestial automatons incapable of true love due to limitations in their nature. Alchemical traditions, particularly those associated with the Paracelsian current, describe the opus magnum, the great work, as a process that necessarily includes phases of decomposition and putrefaction before eventual transmutation. Applying this principle to celestial drama, we can understand the fall not as a permanent flaw, but as a necessary phase of a much larger transformative process that will eventually lead to a state of perfection higher than the original harmony, a perfection tempered by experience. Manuscripts attributed to the Rosicrucian Brotherhood contain enigmatic references to a voluntary cosmic sacrifice, certain beings who chose to descend into the lower realms in order to preserve the universal balance. This perspective suggests that some of the fallen angels may have consciously accepted their exile, not as punishment, but as a mission, keeping alive the spark of questioning, without which cosmic evolution would stagnate in static perfection. The late Babylonian tradition, influenced by Zoroastrianism, preserves the myth of Ishtar descending into hell, not as punishment, but to recover essential knowledge. Similarly, esoteric interpretations suggest that the angelic conflict may represent not a cosmic error, but a deliberate method of distributing divine consciousness through different levels of reality, each fragment carrying a unique and necessary perspective of the total truth. The Hermetic texts, particularly the Kybalion, state that everything is mind, the universe is mental. Following this principle, the celestial drama would not be a literal historical event, but a metaphorical representation of the processes of cosmic consciousness exploring its own possibilities. Guilt and punishment would be limited concepts, applicable only from partial perspectives, not from the totality. Shamanic traditions from various cultures describe the shaman's initiatory dismemberment as a necessary precursor to his healing power. Similarly, esoteric perspectives suggest that the fragmentation of the celestial realm, although apparently traumatic, may have been a necessary precursor to a higher cosmic capacity, the ability to embrace and integrate apparent opposites into a transcendent synthesis. Perhaps the most profound revelation of the esoteric texts is this: there is no single culprit for the first heavenly sin because, from the highest perspective, there really was no sin, just a necessary movement in the unfolding of cosmic consciousness. As Carl Jung observed, the shadow is not the total absence of light, but only insufficient light. What we interpret as an angelic fall may just be a necessary contrast, creating the very possibility of perceiving light. What if the true purpose of this primordial drama was not to establish eternal guilt, but to create the cosmic stage where the final reconciliation of all opposites could eventually take place? This esoteric knowledge invites us to reconsider not only our understanding of the divine, but our own spiritual journey. For if even in heaven perfection contained the germ of transformation, in us two apparent shadows can be portals to a deeper light. As above, so below, the celestial drama continues to unfold in every human decision, in every sincere questioning, in every search for truth beyond the established narratives. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.